Hi guys. Tonight we wander back nearly 7 centuries to a time when warmth meant survival and the wind could whisper through stone. You stand before a medieval castle in the heart of winter, its towers rimmed with frost, its flags stiff with ice. Inside, a few hundred souls huddle behind walls thicker than your arm span, praying that the firewood lasts until spring. You can smell the cold already, sharp as iron, damp with age, and threaded with wood smoke. The air feels like it could shatter if you breathe too hard. You probably wouldn't survive this, not without a few layers and a loyal cook with a cauldron of stew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's awake with me across the world. Now, dim the lights. The snow falls heavy on the battlements, a soft hush blanketing the courtyard below. You step through the gatehouse, past the portcullis that groans in the cold. The guards stamp their feet to keep blood flowing. Their breath curls into ghosts. The castle's stones seem to hold the chill like memory years of winters stacked one upon another. A faint sound of dripping water echoes down the corridor, where icicles cling like glass daggers to the arches. You move slowly, feeling the rough grit of frost beneath your boots. In the great bailey, servants hurry between storerooms carrying bundles of firewood, their faces wrapped in wool. Somewhere in the stables, a horse snorts, steaming the air. The world smells of hay, soot, and wet leather. Everything dampens in winter, the colour, the laughter, even time itself. Inside the keep, torches sputter against drafts, sneaking through cracks in the limestone. Historians still argue whether these castles were truly the marvels of defence they're celebrated for, or just glorified refrigerators for the upper class. The truth? They were both. Built for power and permanence, not comfort. The masons never intended warmth to be their specialty. Each wall, sometimes 3 meters thick, keeps invaders out, but cold firmly in. You touch the wall with your glove and feel its pulse slow, ancient, indifferent. Imagine trying to heat such a place. Fires roared in every hearth, and yet the upper floors remained icy. Smoke crawled along the rafters, seeping into tapestries and hair. The people adapted. They learned the language of endurance, layering, huddling, laughing despite it. They knew how to make winter a ritual instead of a punishment. Above, snow filters through arrow slits, dusting the stairwell. You climb carefully, the steps worn slick by centuries of boots. The sound of distant bells drifts from the chapel tower. Below, servants spread rushes across the floor, fresh straw mixed with herbs like lavender or mint to disguise less pleasant scents. A curious detail this. In especially cold years, those rushes froze to the floor. People simply walked over them until spring. A raven lands on the parapet, shaking snow from its wings. It caws, almost mockingly, before leaping into the white sky. You imagine being a lookout here, alone at dawn, wrapped in furs stiff with frost, watching the forest beyond the walls blur under snow. Once, such isolation meant survival. The higher the wall, the safer the soul inside. But it also meant that warmth came only from other humans, their breath, their stories, their stubborn cheer. Far below the moat lies still, half frozen. No one dares fetch water from it now. It's too dangerous, too brittle. Buckets of ice are hacked from barrels instead, melted slowly by the hearth. The castle smells of smoke, tallow candles, and humanity confined. You might wrinkle your nose, but remember, the medieval nose found comfort in these familiar musk notes: wood fire, wet wool, and stew simmering somewhere deep in the kitchen vaults. You walk along the battlements where guards shuffle side to side to stay warm. Their cloaks whip in the wind. One gnaws at a crust of bread gone stiff as brick. Another mutters about the next watch, wishing he were a monk with a warm cell and a full belly. A fringe tidbit here. Some castles employed fire watch boys to patrol corridors at night with long poles, poking embers back to life. Tiny, moving sparks in a sea of stone. The sun never rises high these days. You can almost feel how short the daylight feels in your bones. Every hour of brightness must be used: repairs, wood gathering, tending livestock in the outer bailey. After sunset, the castle transforms into a half-lit labyrinth where sound carries strangely. A cough echoing from a stairwell, the shuffle of rats, the whisper of someone saying a prayer before bed. Now, pause a moment. Feel the weight of that stillness. The world outside may be frozen, but within these walls, life keeps pulsing, measured by fires, meals, and the ticking drip of melting snow through the roof. In the corner of the courtyard stands a snow-laden tree, perhaps the lone birch that's managed to root itself between stones. It reminds you of something fragile, thriving against odds. That's what winter in a castle demanded: not grandeur, but endurance disguised as grace. You wander back toward the hall, trailing footprints that the wind erases almost instantly. A servant hurries past with an armful of kindling, murmuring a greeting in a dialect you barely catch. The human voice sounds soft here, swallowed by echo and frost. Somewhere deeper inside, laughter erupts, muted, but alive. And so you cross the threshold of this fortress not as a conqueror, but as a guest invited to witness how people survived beauty's harshest season. Their lives stitched together with courage, superstition, and a very good sense of timing when it came to finding the warmest spot by the fire. As the great doors close behind you, shutting out the moan of the wind, you realize you're at the beginning of a long, cold story. The kind told not by victors but by survivors, the builders, cooks, knights and dreamers who learned to find comfort in a world made of stone and snow. The wooden doors groan as they swing shut behind you, sealing out the shrieking wind. The air inside the great hall is thick with wood smoke, mutton grease, and a faint sweetness from ale casks. Your eyes adjust slowly, tracing the dancing orange light that spills from the hearth at the far end. It's enormous, a blazing square of flame big enough to roast an ox. Sparks tumble upward like gold dust. This is the heart of the castle, the place where warmth, conversation, and status collide. You walk across rush-strewn floors that crunch faintly beneath your boots. Every few steps, you pass benches crowded with people, servants, guards, children, each stretching their hands toward the glow. The closer they sit to the fire, the higher their rank tends to be. Nobles bask near the center, their cloaks lined with fur. Lower servants hover at the edges, half in shadow. You can smell both money and manure here, the perfumes and sweat of hierarchy mingled in one humid breath. The great hall wasn't just for eating. It was the medieval world's living room, courtroom, and gossip hub. On feast days, its rafters shimmered with banners and candlelight. On long winter nights like this, it became a smoky cave of survival. The air hums with low chatter, the scrape of knives on trenchers, a lute plucking somewhere near the dais. You drift closer to the fire. Its heat bites your face but never quite reaches your back. That was the problem with medieval heating: it was all or nothing. A blazing inferno in front, bone-deep chill behind. Historians still argue whether castle architects truly understood airflow, or if they simply built what looked impressive. Some claim that certain high chimneys and corner vents were early experiments in ventilation. Others say they were decorative flukes, utterly useless against drafts. The lord of the castle sits high on a carved chair beneath a painted canopy. His expression is half boredom, half benevolent authority, the look of a man used to being both revered and ignored. Beside him, his lady sips spiced wine from a pewter cup, her fingers heavy with rings. Their shadows loom behind them like patient ghosts. Servants weave through the crowd, carrying wooden platters piled with food that smells far richer than it tastes. Salted beef, tough as leather, boiled turnips, and pies thick with mystery meat. You notice a cook near the hearth sweating through her linen cap. She's been feeding this fire since dawn, shoveling in logs with the rhythm of prayer. The wood hisses and spits oak, mostly, though good hardwood is getting scarce. There's laughter now, loud, sudden, a little drunk. A bard has begun a tale about a knight who mistook his own shadow for a dragon. The hall roars with amusement. You can almost feel the collective relief. Laughter means warmth. Warmth means life. The sound fills the beams and stones, pushing back the winter. Above, the ceiling arches into darkness. From time to time, a puff of smoke lingers there, trapped before escaping through the louver, a wooden vent in the roof that opens to the sky. In theory, the smoke goes out. In practice, it curls down again, stinging eyes and staining tapestries. That's why medieval people's lungs weren't in the best shape. Still, they accepted it. Smoke meant safety. It meant a roof, a fire, and enough food to last the night. At the far corner, a few men gamble with carved bone dice. One of them is missing fingers, frostbitten from a past winter. He laughs anyway, tossing his winnings into a leather pouch. You wonder what they dream about when the fire dies low. Maybe summer, or maybe just another full belly. You take a seat near the wall, where the heat barely reaches. The stone behind you feels damp. Someone hands you a wooden cup of ale, and the warmth from it seeps into your hands. The taste is rough and yeasty, half drink, half bread. A fringe tidbit here. Historians found that ale consumed in winter was often thicker, closer to porridge than liquid. It was both food and drink, calorie-dense comfort in a world without cocoa or central heating. A serving boy passes with a candle stub, lighting fresh tallow lamps set along the walls. Their glow is uneven, yellow and trembling, but it softens the gloom. The smell, however, is less charming. Animal fat melting into smoke. No one complains. It's the scent of home. Someone near you begins humming an old carol, its melody simple and sad. The tune drifts upward and mingles with the crackle of fire, the mutter of dice, the distant bark of a hound. The castle seems alive now, a single breathing thing made of stone, smoke, and voices. Then, as though on cue, the outer doors creak open again. A rush of icy air swirls through the hall, snuffing out a few candles. A messenger enters, his cloak stiff with frost, snow melting onto the flagstones. All eyes turn briefly toward him. He bows low to the Lord, delivers a parchment sealed with red wax, then retreats toward the fire to thaw his hands. The gossip starts instantly. Who sent it? What news from the road? Whether a rival lord's crops failed. Even in midwinter, information travels like heat. The Lord breaks the seal, frowns faintly, then waves for more wine. Whatever it was, he'll deal with it tomorrow. Tonight, the fire is high and the night is long. You lean back, letting the sounds blur into one soft hum. This was how medieval people survived winter, not by comfort, but by community. Every laugh, every shared bowl of stew, every note of music was a defiance of the cold outside. They turned necessity into ritual. Still, you can't help noticing how shadows pool in the corners, how even the largest fire leaves half the hall in darkness. There's something oddly beautiful about it. The contrast, the flicker between warmth and chill, life and sleep. You sip the last of your ale, and the world grows hazy with its warmth. Somewhere above, a bat flutters near the beams. Somewhere below, a hound sighs in its dreams. You imagine the same scene centuries ago. The same fire, the same laughter, the same quiet yearning for the sun's return. The stones have seen it all and kept their secrets. When the fire finally cracks low and the last servant banks the embers, the hall settles into silence. The heat fades, replaced by a cool whisper. But for now, the warmth lingers just enough to make you drowsy. The night outside can do its worst. Within these walls, humanity glows like a coal that refuses to die. The fire's glow still clings to you as dawn creeps into the hall. The embers smolder, red as hidden rubies, while servants shuffle about to sweep last night's rushes. Your breath clouds in the chill. It feels like waking inside a stone lung. You can almost taste the cold, metallic and dry. Somewhere beyond the curtains, a rooster braves the icy air with a single defiant crow. Morning in a castle has begun, and you're about to discover how people dressed to endure it. You head toward a wooden screen that divides the great hall from the private chambers. Beyond it, the castle's inhabitants stir nobles, squires, maids, all cocooning themselves in layers that make modern winter coats look like toys. In medieval Europe, warmth wasn't a luxury, it was a strategy. Chroniclers of the age often remarked that a noble's wardrobe was his first fortress. You begin with your own layers, a linen shirt, light but coarse, that never truly feels clean. Over it, a woolen tunic, then another thicker one dyed in muted greens or browns, colours that hide the grime of daily life. Around your legs, hose cling like second skin, joined by garters that cut faintly at the thighs. Then, boots of stiff leather, cracked from old snow. Each layer traps what little warmth your body can make. A curious little custom emerges here. Some castle dwellers stuffed bits of rabbit fur between garments, a kind of DIY insulation. It sounds ridiculous, but when the wind howled down the chimneys, any softness was a blessing. Archaeologists have even found remnants of feathers sewn into linings down before down jackets were ever a thing. A servant brings in a fur-lined surcoat for the lady of the house. The fur smells faintly musky, and the lady wrinkles her nose before slipping it on. She fastens it with a brooch shaped like a falcon, a small reminder that fashion still mattered, even when everyone's toes were numb. In a world of endless grey stone, colour was defiance. Deep reds, indigos and gold trims gleamed against the monotony of frost. But beneath the elegance lay a harsh truth. Clothes weren't just decoration, they were armour against misery. Contemporary accounts suggest that wool, the miracle fabric of the time, could keep even damp cold at bay. It was woven thick and felted, sometimes mixed with lanolin-rich grease to repel moisture. Imagine the scent, part barnyard, part earth, oddly comforting. Still, no amount of layering could erase the cold completely. In servants' quarters, people slept in the same clothes they wore by day. Some even shared garments, taking turns while the other set hung by the fire, stiff as wood from frozen sweat. You might smile at this strange rotation of sleeves and leggings, but it was simply how survival looked in January. Upstairs, in a small solar chamber, a maid helps her mistress dress. The lady's hands tremble slightly as she ties her girdle. Her gown is heavy, trailing over the rushes. A bright girdle of woven silk cuts through the gloom, a rare luxury imported from the East. No one really knows how many layers noblewomen wore, but one Italian chronicler joked that a lady of rank might vanish inside her own clothes. You can almost hear the rustle of fabric and the quiet sigh of exasperation. Meanwhile, down in the servants' wing, dressing is an entirely different ritual. A boy named Will pulls on hose patched with scraps of old sacking. He tightens his rope belt and rubs his arms briskly before stepping into the yard. His breath forms little ghosts in the air. If he's lucky, he'll find a sheepskin to wrap around his shoulders later. If not, he'll work until motion becomes his heat. Experts remain divided on just how effective medieval winter wear really was. Some argue that the layering of natural fibres offered better insulation than we credit. Others claim most people simply shivered their way through the season. What's certain is that the poor felt it more acutely than the lords whose furs lined entire trunks. One tax record even notes that a small manor spent more on fur imports than grain that year. A statement of priority, perhaps, or of vanity. Still, necessity bred creativity. In the kitchen, a scullery maid ties linen around her feet before slipping into wooden clogs. The linen soaks up moisture and prevents frostbite, a trick passed down through generations. You can hear her humming, the melody quick and bright against the dull clang of pots. She smells faintly of ash, soap and onions. Outside, the first light hits the courtyard. Steam rises from the stables, where grooms brush horses under a veil of frost. Their coats gleam dark and sleek, releasing clouds of warmth that smell of hay and sweat. The animals fare better than humans sometimes, they're built for this. Yet even they get blankets, stitched from rough wool and smelling of smoke. In the armoury, a squire struggles with his chainmail. The metal bites at his fingers, colder than anything else in the castle. He mutters under his breath, breathing into his hands. It takes time to layer himself padded gambeson, mail shirt, surcoat. He looks half warrior, half walking furnace. A scholar once joked that knights didn't so much fight as slowly cook inside their armor. It's not far from the truth. By mid-morning, the castle is alive with rustling fabrics and the creak of leather. You hear the faint jingling of belts, the whisper of cloaks brushing stone. The sounds blend like music, a symphony of cloth, weight, and motion. It's the language of survival, played in wool and fur. Even small accessories carried meaning. Gloves lined with squirrel fur were prized, both for warmth and status. Woolen hats shaped like hoods known as chaperones framed faces against the wind. Some people even stuffed dried herbs like rosemary or thyme into their collars, believing the scent could guard against winter sickness. A strange but touching detail, the hope that smell itself could be a kind of shield. You pause by the fire once more, tugging your cloak tighter. The smoke makes your eyes water. Everyone looks slightly puffy from it, their cheeks ruddy with cold. Yet, beneath the discomfort, there's pride. To be well dressed in winter wasn't just comfort, it was civilization's small victory over nature. Outside, snow begins again, gentle but relentless. You glance at the battlements, imagining guards up there in their thick cloaks, faces red and raw. Below, the servants still hurry, their breath pluming like incense. And you, wrapped in centuries of fabric and resilience, begin to understand something quietly profound. Warmth, in a medieval castle, was never guaranteed. It was earned, layered, and fiercely kept. The moment you step away from the hearth's orange glow, the chill folds over you again, slow, invisible, almost personal. It slips down your collar and curls around your ribs. The castle's walls, so thick and majestic from the outside, turn traitorous from within. They sweat with damp, they hum with wind, and they leak cold like sieves. You can almost hear the air sighing through unseen cracks. You walk along a corridor that twists around the inner keep, its flagstones polished smooth by centuries of passing feet. A faint mist hovers near the floor, your breath meets it halfway. Each torch you pass sputters as a draught steals its flame sideways. The smell is an odd cocktail. Old smoke, wet plaster, and the mineral tang of stone that's seen too many winters. We know from surviving building accounts that medieval masons were masters of fortification but novices of insulation. They knew how to keep arrows out, but not wind. Even the finest castles, those admired in illuminated manuscripts, were notorious for their drafts. To live in one was to live at the mercy of tiny holes and vast walls that refused to warm. You run your hand along the stone, feeling the moisture gather under your glove. During frost, condensation became ice, forming delicate white filigree between blocks of limestone. At dawn, these crystals melted into thin streams that trickled down walls, pooling under beds and chests. Sometimes, the rushes on the floor would freeze solid overnight, turning rooms into slippery ponds of straw and ice. Oddly enough, there was a medieval superstition that drafts carried illness, what they called evil airs. To ward them off, people hung tapestries or heavy curtains over doorways. Not for decoration, though they were beautiful, but as a kind of primitive insulation. Imagine the shimmer of woven gold thread catching the torchlight, hiding not just the cold but the walls themselves. You duck beneath one such curtain and enter a smaller room. A brazier glows weakly in the center, fed with bits of charcoal and pine cones. The air here feels marginally softer, though it still bites the nose. Beside the brazier sits a steward, wrapped in a cloak the color of soot. He's rubbing beeswax into a window frame, muttering something about keeping out the devil's breath. The glass panes are tiny diamond, shaped slivers held in by lead. Most of them are frosted opaque. Sunlight seeps through like honey through cloth. Experts remain divided on whether medieval builders truly understood heat retention. Some argue they experimented with double shutters and wall hangings as rudimentary insulation. Others insist these were aesthetic gestures masquerading as innovation. What's undeniable is that people got creative. Some even stuffed moss into gaps around doors, while poorer folk smeared a mix of mud and horsehair to stop the wind. Primitive caulking, if you like. A servant passes carrying a copper basin of steaming water. You can see the vapor vanish almost instantly into the chill. She tells you half amused, half resigned that warm water never stays warm past a prayer's length. In the kitchen, they boil it again and again, just to feel the illusion of heat on their hands. Her breath smells faintly of ale and smoke. Her fingers are raw, the skin cracked like old parchment. In the Lord's chamber above, luxury takes a different shape. The bed, a massive oak structure, stands on a dais to escape the cold seeping from the floor. Thick curtains surround it, trapping body heat in a private little world. The linens are rough but plentiful, layered with fur throws, fox, wolf, or whatever the last hunt yielded. When the couple sleeps, their combined warmth fogs the canopy until droplets form and fall softly through the night. Romantic, perhaps, until one of them wakes damp and shivering. A curious architectural habit. Castle fireplaces were often built wide but shallow, designed less to radiate warmth than to display wealth. The bigger the opening, the more impressive the fire, but also the more heat lost straight up the chimney. A medieval paradox showing power while freezing in style. One chronicle from northern England describes a castle so cold that icicles formed on the inside of the chapel font. The priest had to break them each morning before Mass. You picture him there, swinging his censer, incense smoke curling through clouds of his own breath, determined to keep heaven's chill at bay. If you pause now, you can hear how sound travels in this place. A cough in a lower hall echoes like thunder. Footsteps above bloom into whispers below. The architecture magnifies not warmth but presence. Maybe that's why people filled the silence with chatter, music, or prayer. It made the space feel inhabited, less like a tomb of stone. Somewhere in the kitchen wing, a door bangs shut. A gust rushes through the corridor, scattering a few loose feathers from the floor rushes. You shiver, instinctively pulling your cloak closer. The cold isn't cruel, it's patient. It seeps, waits, hums. The people who lived here must have known that you couldn't fight it forever. You could only outlast it. To do that, they built habits. Fires were tended from dawn till dusk. Windows were shuttered before sunset. Woolen hangings were checked daily for damp, because moisture bred mold, and mold bred sickness. The castle became a living organism. Every servant, its immune system, patching, feeding, breathing warmth where they could. Even animals played their part. Cats curled near hearths to deter mice nibbling at stored grain. Dogs sprawled near the kitchen fire, doubling as heaters for the staff. You might find it strange, but there are letters describing lords who allowed their favourite hounds to sleep in bed with them, not for affection, but for warmth. By afternoon, the castle smells of smoke and humanity. The windows glow amber from the low sun, and the air trembles with the constant crackle of fires. You notice how your eyes sting slightly, your throat dry from soot. Everyone here breathes the same air, stale, warm in patches, icy in others. Yet, there's a rhythm to it. Each breath feels earned. You make your way to a narrow staircase spiraling upward. At the top, the wind greets you like an old, rude friend. Through a narrow slit, you glimpse snow swirling across the fields, catching in the hollows of roofs. The cold landscape below seems endless, but the castle, for all its flaws, stands steady, a defiant ember in a world of white. You exhale, watching your breath dissolve. Somewhere deep inside the keep, another fire flares to life. The cycle continues, drafts, drips, shivers, and sparks, all part of the strange symphony of medieval survival. And though your fingers ache and your nose burns, you can't help admiring the quiet dignity of it. People refusing to surrender to a season that wanted everything. By the time the afternoon light fades to a bluish haze, the castle's rhythm shifts toward its favorite comfort: food. Somewhere deep beneath the main hall, a door creaks open and a blast of fragrant heat rolls up the stairs. You follow your nose down into the bowels of the keep, where the castle's truest heart beats not in the chapel, nor the bedchamber, but the kitchen. It's a cavernous space, alive with the shimmer of firelight and the hiss of boiling pots. Smoke lingers thick under the rafters, curling around iron hooks that dangle like crooked fingers. You can almost taste the salt in the air, sharp and familiar. A cauldron the size of a barrel hangs over the main hearth, bubbling with something halfway between stew and glue. Beside it, a cook stirs slowly with a paddle that might once have been part of a ship's oar. We know from surviving inventories that winter dining was less about variety and more about endurance. Once the harvest ended and the ground froze, every meal depended on the wisdom or luck of last autumn's storage. Salted pork, smoked fish, dried beans, onions strung from beams like garlands. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept bellies full and spirits alive. You edge closer to a table where a young apprentice is rolling out dough. His hands move quickly, practiced, leaving little flour storms in the air. He's making trenchers, flat rounds of bread used as both plate and meal. They'll soak up grease and sauce, then be tossed to the dogs or the poor outside the gate. Waste wasn't a sin here. It was a currency of generosity. A curious little practice catches your eye. Near the wall, strings of herbs hang drying in the heat: rosemary, sage, marjoram, even lavender. Cooks used them not only for flavor, but to mask the tang of meat that had aged beyond its prime. Some even stuffed cloves into joints of mutton before roasting, believing the spice drove out cold humors. The smell is oddly comforting, like a memory of summer trapped in the smoke. A steward passes, marking items on a wax tablet. He mutters about the salt stores running low, about needing more barrels from the coast. Salt was gold in winter, it kept everything alive. One barrel could preserve enough pork to feed 30 mouths. Without it, meat spoiled fast, and sickness spread faster. Experts remain divided on just how well medieval preservation methods worked. Some argue that constant salting stripped food of nutrients. Others point to evidence of surprisingly advanced curing techniques. Whatever the case, the taste was never subtle. You'd wake from a meal thirsty enough to drink from the moat. You lean against a cool wall, watching the choreography unfold. Servants ladle broth, sharpen knives, fan the fire with leather bellows. The air hums with clatter and chatter. Someone drops a spoon, it clinks. Then laughter erupts. These kitchens weren't quiet or genteel. They were engines of survival, noisy and human. In the corner, a spit boy turns the roasting meat by hand. His job is as thankless as it sounds: hours spent facing the flames, eyes streaming from heat. Yet he hums softly, tapping his foot to a rhythm only he knows. A parchment on the shelf nearby lists what the week's feasts will include: venison pie, eel stew, almond pudding. It's written in an elegant but smoky script, the ink smudged with grease. Oddly enough, there was a folk belief that eating white foods in winter milk, almonds, fish kept one's complexion fair and spirit pure. Meanwhile, peasants outside the walls gnawed on rye bread and dried peas, praying their teeth would hold out. The difference between classes could be measured in spices. Someone offers you a taste from a ladle: barley stew thick with turnips. It burns your tongue, but the flavor blooms earthy and sweet. You feel it travel down your chest like a small torch. Around you, the cooks chatter about shortages, gossip about the Lord's mood, and tease one another about whose stew could revive a frozen corpse. For a moment, you forget the grey world above. On a side table, a row of earthenware jars gleam in the firelight. Honey, vinegar, lard, each carefully hoarded. The head cook taps one and smiles. "Our treasure room," she says. She isn't joking. To lose these was to lose control over the winter. Above the hearth, bundles of dried apples and pears sway gently in the updraft. Some are so shriveled they look like tiny faces, grinning at your hunger. A dog dozes near the ashes, his ears twitching each time someone drops a bone. If you close your eyes, You can map the whole castle by its smells: damp stone upstairs, cold iron in the armory, and here life. The scent of meat and wood smoke wraps around you like a blanket. It's no wonder people lingered here long after the day's meal was done. When the food is finally ready, servants begin the grand migration upward. Platters lifted shoulder high, they weave through corridors toward the great hall. The procession is solemn but quick. The cold in the hall will rob the dishes of warmth before they reach the table. You trail behind, catching the faint shimmer of fat in the torchlight. Back in the hall, the fire blazes anew. The lord and lady preside as before, but now the room hums with energy. Platters arrive steaming, candles multiply, voices rise. The first bite of hot food is a small triumph over winter. You can see it in their faces, relief mixed with satisfaction, as though they've beaten the season at its own game for one more day. But even here, in the glow of feasting, hunger remains a shadow at the edge of light. Outside, peasants in the nearby village eat crusts beside weak fires. Within these walls, abundance feels almost guilty, almost holy. It's a performance of survival, repeated year after year. As the last scraps vanish and cups refill with warm ale, someone begins to sing. The melody curls through the smoke like a ribbon, low, rhythmic, ancient. You lean back, feeling full, drowsy, and strangely at peace. For all its hardship, the medieval winter had moments like this, when the world outside froze, but inside, humanity remembered how to glow. Morning breaks pale and brittle, the kind of light that seems to crack rather than shine. You wake to the unmistakable chill of stone that has forgotten what warmth feels like. Somewhere down the corridor, a bucket tips, followed by a curse muffled by distance. It is time to face one of the least glamorous sides of castle life. The question of hygiene when water turns to ice and the air stings your skin. You follow a servant carrying a wooden pail that sloshes with a thin layer of ice on top. Her breath curls behind her like a banner. She knocks on a heavy oak door and vanishes inside a chamber where steam immediately clouds the air. The faint smell that drifts out is not perfume, but vinegar and ashes. In a medieval castle, cleanliness was measured in effort, not outcome. We know from period household manuals that most people did not bathe often, not because they did not want to, but because winter made water an enemy. Heating it required firewood, which was precious. Bathing risked sickness, or so people thought. The chill that followed a bath was feared more than the grime that preceded it. Even kings limited themselves to a handful of baths each year, while peasants might count themselves fortunate to sit in a steaming tub once a season. There is, however, a curious little detail. In some noble houses, bathing became a kind of ceremony. Wooden tubs lined with linen were filled with water perfumed by herbs. Servants poured in rose petals or crushed thyme, claiming it chased away evil airs. Musicians sometimes played nearby to distract from the awkwardness of sitting naked in a cold chamber that smelled faintly of damp wood. You can imagine the laughter, the self-conscious chatter, the quick rush to dry off before the steam vanished. A maid appears carrying a chamber pot. She walks briskly, eyes down. The pot is earthenware, glazed but chipped. Its contents will soon join the line of buckets waiting to be emptied outside the postern gate. In winter, the simple act of disposal becomes treacherous. The stairs freeze, the ground becomes slick. More than one unlucky servant has met disaster trying to dump waste into the moat. Some scholars still debate whether castles truly stank as badly as popular myth suggests. Archaeological evidence from garderobe shafts shows that waste was often directed into cesspits lined with stone, a small marvel of medieval engineering. Yet even the best designs had limits. Cold weather slowed decay, and the smell of ammonia was as common as the tolling of bells. You find yourself near a narrow corridor leading to the castle's privy. The door is half open, revealing a wooden bench with a hole that drops into darkness. The air is sharp, oddly clean, as if the cold itself has frozen the scent. A torch burns weakly on the wall, and frost glitters on the iron hinges. You think of how courage comes in small acts, like sitting still in this place when the temperature bites through wool. Nearby, in a separate alcove, a woman is washing linens. Her hands are red to the wrist, her knuckles cracked. She dips the cloth into water gone grey with lye soap, wrings it, and hangs it before the hearth. Steam rises briefly before the fabric stiffens again. She hums softly, a tune without words. Every drop of that water had to be hauled up from a frozen well, chipped from ice, then boiled in a pot that leaves soot on her sleeves. Contemporary records mention that castles often employed full-time water carriers. Their backs bent from labour. They trudged up staircases countless times a day. One chronicler in Burgundy wrote admiringly of a servant who could carry 2 full pails without spilling a drop, even when the steps were slick as glass. You can almost see him now, his breath clouding, his boots thudding against wet stone. In the Lord's Solar, comfort looks slightly different. Basins of warmed water are prepared with scented herbs, perhaps a luxury imported from the Levant. The lady of the house washes her hands and face, then dabs rose oil on her temples. A superstition persists that fragrant oils could ward off illness by strengthening the spirit. Whether that was belief or placebo, no one can say. It does, however, make the chamber smell far kinder than the kitchens below. Even the simple act of brushing teeth, if one could call it that, involved salt, charcoal, or a chew stick cut from hazel. People spat into rushes on the floor and wiped their mouths with bits of cloth. No mint, no foam, no ceremony, just a quick scrape and a prayer. You wince slightly, imagining the texture of ashes against enamel. A fragile sort of order emerges from all this inconvenience. Servants maintain routines not because they believe in cleanliness as we do, but because habit is survival. When water is scarce, they scrub only what shows. They perfume what cannot be washed. They sweep rushes laced with mint and chamomile to trick the nose into believing the air is fresh. These small illusions keep morale alive. Experts who study domestic life point out that winter hygiene had more to do with smoke than soap. The constant fires dried skin, sterilized the air in their own harsh way, and painted every face with the faint scent of tallow and ash. You might laugh at the idea of feeling clean through smoke, but to them, it meant safety. Fire drove away not just cold, but unseen sickness. As afternoon deepens, the castle grows humid near the kitchens and bone-dry near the towers. Each corner has its own smell. Vinegar and herbs, lye and wool, sweat and smoke. You find the mixture strangely comforting now, like proof of life. The servants who pass you nod politely, their faces chapped, their spirits practical. In the courtyard, buckets line up near a well crusted with ice. Someone chips at it with an iron bar, sending shards flying. A child laughs, chasing a piece that glitters like glass. For a moment, the whole castle seems lighter, warmer, not because the temperature has changed, but because people keep moving. Motion is the only real luxury in this weather. When evening comes, the hall will fill again with smoke and chatter. Someone will complain about the smell of the privy. Another will joke that it's warmer than their own bed. Laughter will ripple through the gloom, and as the candles burn low, the truth will settle like dust. Winter is not conquered here, only managed, one bucket and one breath at a time. The sound of footsteps wakes you before dawn, a steady rhythm against the flagstones that echoes through the keep. The air feels heavy, not just with cold but with the quiet purpose of people who have work to do long before the Lord's rise. You follow the faint glow of a lantern bobbing down the corridor and step into the world of servants, the unseen pulse that keeps the castle alive. A bell rings somewhere below, not loud but clear enough to stir everyone from their straw mattresses. It is the signal to light the fires. The air in these lower halls bites at your cheeks, dry and sharp. A line of servants moves through the half-darkness, each carrying a bundle of kindling or a clay pot of coals kept glowing overnight in the kitchen hearth. The smell of smoke and wool fills the passage. From household accounts written centuries ago, we know that the first duty of the day was to rekindle life into the sleeping fires. Every hearth had to be coaxed awake, every brazier fed before frost could creep further in. The youngest and lowest servants were given this task, for it required no rank, only endurance and thick fingers. You can hear them murmuring small prayers as they blow gently on embers until sparks catch and flames bloom in dull orange light. One of the maids, her nose red with cold, wipes her hands on her apron and moves to the next chamber. She works in silence, her shadow large and soft against the wall. This ritual repeats throughout the castle, a slow awakening of light and warmth. In these early hours, no one speaks much. The air itself feels sacred. A curious practice persisted in many great houses. The steward would walk the corridors just after sunrise, touching each door to judge the temperature within. His notes determined who was managing their firewood ration wisely. A lord could scold or reward depending on how warm his guests or family had kept their rooms. The steward's job was part administrator, part judge of invisible economies of heat. In the kitchens below, the day has already begun. A cook strikes iron against flint, her movements brisk and certain. The sparks leap like tiny fireworks before landing in straw. Soon, the air thickens with warmth and the first scent of porridge. Her assistant chops onions with numb fingers, his breath puffing across the cutting board. Even before the sun climbs, breakfast waits to be born. The rhythm of work follows the castle's hierarchy. Servants of lower rank clean and haul. Those slightly higher oversee and report. In one corner, a scullion scrubs yesterday's dishes with sand, his sleeves soaked to the elbow. The sound of his work mixes with the shuffle of feet, the occasional cough, and the soft hum of voices starting to thaw. Scholars who study medieval domestic life still argue about how much rest these servants ever truly got. Some suggest they worked from before dawn until long after the lords went to bed, stealing sleep in snatches. Others believe that winter brought a slower tempo, when the dark itself forced even the busiest hands to pause. Either way, the work never truly ended. You follow a boy named Edwin as he carries a torch through the narrow servants' passage. His task this morning is to fetch water from the well. The rope bites into his palms, the bucket heavy with half-frozen slush. He whistles softly to himself, a tune his mother taught him before she sent him to the castle to earn his keep. The sound echoes oddly, both bright and lonely. He passes through the small door that leads to the outer yard. Snow crunches beneath his boots. The stars are still visible, bright and cold above the towers. Around him the castle sleeps but never truly rests. Smoke curls from a few chimneys where fires have taken hold. The stables stir with the snorts of horses and the shuffle of hay. Somewhere a dog shakes, sending frost from its coat. Inside again, Edwin pours the water into wooden tubs near the kitchen. The cook nods without looking up. He will repeat this journey several times before the first meal is served. His arms ache already, but he hides the pain. There is pride here, quiet but steady, in keeping others warm and fed. In another part of the keep, older servants sweep the great hall. They gather last night's ashes, replace the rushes on the floor, and check for embers that might start a fire in the wrong place. The scent of herbs in the new rushes rises faintly, sweet against the lingering smoke. It is strange how this mixture of labor and scent begins to feel like prayer. A small but revealing habit catches your attention. Before lighting any new fire, some servants touch the hearthstone 3 times, whispering a blessing that combines Christian and older pagan elements. They speak of Saint Brigid, protector of home and flame. The gesture is quick, almost hidden, but it lingers in the rhythm of hands that know cold too well. By mid-morning, the castle breathes fully again. Fires crackle in every room, steam rises from the kitchens, and even the great hall begins to smell of warmth. Servants move like streams through the corridors, each with a task that fits perfectly into the day's choreography. A few laugh as they pass each other, a brief exchange of cheer that disappears as quickly as it came. From somewhere above, you hear the bell that signals the lords are stirring. The servants straighten their backs, wipe soot from their faces, and prepare for another round of invisibility. Soon, their work will be hidden behind tapestries and the illusion of effortless comfort. Yet without them, the castle would fall silent and cold within hours. You step back into the main corridor, where the air now feels almost gentle. Light spills through narrow windows, painting the stone in gold. The scent of bread and wood smoke trails behind you. For a brief moment, you sense what the servants must feel. A small victory every time a fire catches, every time warmth pushes back the dark. It is not glory, but it is enough. As the morning brightens, you climb the narrow staircase that winds upward toward the private chambers of the castle's lady. The air grows a little warmer with each step, faintly scented with beeswax and lavender. Up here, above the echo of servants and the smell of smoke, life takes on a slower rhythm. This is the solar, the sunlit heart of domestic comfort, where the lady spends her winter days surrounded by warmth that is carefully tended and never wasted. The door creaks as you step inside. The space is modest but elegant, its walls draped in embroidered hangings that soften both the chill and the sound. A brazier glows in the center of the room, perfuming the air with resin and pine. The floor is covered with thick rush mats woven with dried herbs. A small window, shuttered against the cold, allows only a gentle shaft of light to fall across a table, scattered with embroidery threads. You hear the quiet hum of women's voices. Two maids are spinning flax on small wheels, their feet moving in steady rhythm. The lady sits by the brazier, her hands busy with a piece of tapestry that depicts a hunting scene, the hounds frozen mid-leap in golden thread. Her needle flashes like a sliver of light, and for a moment you forget the winter beyond the walls. From letters and household accounts of the time, we know that noble women spent long hours in such rooms, managing estates through scribes, mending linens, and supervising servants. The solar was more than a retreat. It was an office, a workshop, and a sanctuary from the public life of the great hall. The lady's authority radiated quietly from this small, sun-warmed space. A curious detail recorded by travelers tells of how these chambers sometimes doubled as informal schools. Young girls of noble birth learn not only embroidery and music, but also arithmetic, reading, and the art of polite conversation. The lady of the house acted as both teacher and example. You can almost see her pausing in her work to correct a pupil's stitches or to recite a psalm while the brazier crackles softly beside her. At one corner of the room sits a small harp. Its strings hum faintly in the draught that slips through the shutter. The lady's daughter plucks a few tentative notes, smiling shyly when the sound falters. The melody is simple but sweet, carrying the warmth of habit and hope. It fills the chamber with a kind of fragile courage. Historians continue to discuss whether the term solar referred purely to sunlight or to solitude. Some argue it meant the room most exposed to the southern sun, while others suggest it described the place where the family withdrew from the bustle below. Whatever the origin, the name feels right. The space glows with a quiet intimacy that belongs to daylight even in the darkest months. A maid enters carrying a small jug of heated wine spiced with cinnamon and cloves. The scent cuts through the chill, rich and soothing. The lady accepts it with a graceful nod, offering a sip to one of the younger girls. They giggle softly at the warmth that blooms on their tongues. It is a luxury few in the castle can afford. On a nearby shelf rests a psalter, its pages painted with delicate gold initials. The lady traces a finger along a line of Latin text, murmuring a prayer before returning to her embroidery. Faith here is woven into routine, not separate from it. The rhythm of needle and thread mirrors the rhythm of devotion. At her feet, a small dog curls in a cushion, half asleep. Its fur gleams in the light, and it occasionally lifts its head to watch the maids with mild curiosity. Animals were common companions in solars, both for affection and for warmth. A favorite lapdog could be as precious as any jewel. The conversation turns to news from the village. A servant brings word that the river has frozen completely, making it easier to cross but harder to draw water. The lady listens thoughtfully, then dictates a message to her steward, instructing that extra firewood be sent to the smithy. Her voice is calm, deliberate, and kind. It is easy to forget that her decisions keep the castle functioning. Her management, the invisible thread that holds comfort together. A curious household ritual unfolds as the day deepens. The ladies' maids hang damp cloths near the brazier, believing that soft moisture in the air keeps the skin from cracking. They also rub their hands with goose fat mixed with rose water, a homemade balm against frostbite. It leaves a faint sheen and a scent that lingers in the room. You find it oddly pleasant, like memory trapped in perfume. By mid-afternoon, the light fades again. The embroidery is folded away, the instruments set aside. The lady walks to the shuttered window and opens it slightly. A gust of icy air rushes in, carrying the faint cry of crows and the smell of snow. She watches for a moment, her breath visible in the chill, then closes it gently. You sense a longing there, not just for warmth but for the open world she rarely enters in winter. Experts in medieval daily life suggest that the solar also served as a refuge from the emotional cold of courtly formality. Here, laughter was softer, stories were shared without caution, and a woman could speak her thoughts without the echo of male judgment. The privacy must have felt like sunlight itself. As the candles are lit, their glow settles across the tapestries, bringing to life the scenes of knights and forests stitched months earlier. The room becomes golden again, the kind of light that invites drowsiness. You listen to the whisper of spinning wheels, the gentle murmur of prayers, and the faint pop of pine resin in the brazier. Outside, the wind rises, brushing the tower walls like a slow drumbeat. But here, in this small haven above the world, warmth feels human, crafted by hands and voices and faith. You realize that survival in winter was not only about fire and food, it was also about moments like this, the delicate art of turning routine into peace. The wind sharpens as evening approaches. You make your way down the spiral stair from the solar, following the echo of heavy boots striking stone. The rhythm grows louder until it fills the courtyard like a drumbeat. The knights are training again. Despite the cold, their movements are study in stubbornness. Snowflakes swirl in the air, caught in the flicker of torches that struggle to stay lit. The courtyard smells of iron and sweat, two scents that never quite leave a castle. A dozen men-at-arms circle the practice yard, breath hissing through clenched teeth. Their armor catches the dull winter light, each plate rimmed with frost. When they strike, the clang of metal rings across the walls like church bells out of tune. You flinch at the sound, sharp and bright against the muffled snow. From the writings of chroniclers who travelled with noble households, we know that winter training was considered both punishment and necessity. A knight could not afford to soften, even when the rivers froze and roads vanished under drifts of snow. A sword still needed to feel like an extension of the body, not a foreign weight. To stop was to lose edge and honour alike. A young squire struggles to lift a practice sword as long as his arm. His breath comes in clouds, his cheeks red with effort. The master-at-arms watches without mercy, his cloak snapping behind him. "Again," he says. The boy obeys, feet slipping in the snow. Each motion is awkward but determined, driven by the dream of one day earning the right to carry steel that gleams for real. Oddly enough, a few records mention that some lords encouraged their men to practice indoors during harsh storms, turning empty halls into makeshift arenas. Furniture was dragged aside, tapestries rolled up, and straw scattered on the floor to soften falls. Imagine the thunder of boots and the echo of grunts filling a room meant for feasts and dancing. Discipline did not rest simply because the weather did. A blacksmith crosses the yard, his apron stiff from cold, carrying a set of repaired gauntlets. He pauses to watch the training, smiling faintly. His forge glows behind him, a pocket of molten colour in the grey world. The air around it hums with heat, smelling of charcoal and hot metal. The contrast between fire and frost seems almost alive. Experts on medieval warfare still disagree about how often real combat happened in winter. Some claim campaigns paused until spring. Others insist that surprise attacks in cold months were a favored strategy. Yet even in peace, the training continued. Knights were expected to embody vigilance, to keep the body ready for violence at any hour. You step closer to the fence surrounding the practice ground. A knight raises his visor, revealing a face red and glistening, his breath short but steady. He wipes his brow with a woolen sleeve and laughs. "Better to sweat in the snow than bleed in summer," he says. His companion grins, nodding in agreement. The camaraderie feels genuine, a kind of warmth that even winter cannot touch. Nearby, a farrier tends to a restless horse. The animal stamps, steam rising from its flank. Its breath clouds the air as the farrier murmurs in low tones, hammering a new shoe into place. Sparks leap briefly into the gloom before vanishing. The smell of scorched hoof mixes with snow and smoke, a scent that is oddly comforting in its familiarity. You notice the way the knights move, their armor creaking softly. Underneath, they wear padded garments that trap heat but also sweat. When the training ends, they peel off layers, steam rising from their bodies like mist from a thawing river. A page hurries forward with a cloth and a cup of ale, his hands trembling from cold. The knight takes both with a nod of thanks. One of the older men sits on a bench near the wall, his hair silver under his hood. His armor is dented, his gloves patched. He watches the younger fighters with the distant calm of someone who has seen too many battles. He tells you, almost to himself, that in winter, a soldier's greatest enemy is not another sword but stillness. "Keep moving," he says softly, "and the cold will never claim you." There is a curious superstition among these men. Before every training session, they trace a small cross on the blade with a gloved finger. It is less about piety and more about rhythm, a ritual to steady the hand and heart. One knight even carries a charm in the shape of a tiny sun, tucked inside his gauntlet. He swears it keeps his fingers from freezing. The sound of the master's whistle cuts through the air. Practice ends. The men gather their weapons, joking as they trudge toward the barracks. Their laughter bounces off the courtyard walls, softening the austerity of stone. One slips on a patch of ice, curses, and grins at the teasing that follows. These moments of levity are precious. They keep the cold from seeping into the spirit. As the knights disappear inside, you linger near the forge. The blacksmith wipes his hands on a rag and nods at you. His voice carries a quiet pride. "We all earn our heat differently," he says. "Some by swinging blades, some by hammering iron." He returns to his work, sparks flying like brief stars against the dusk. Snow begins to fall again, thick and silent. The courtyard grows dim except for the orange glow of the forge. The training field stands empty now, footprints already fading beneath fresh flakes. The silence feels deep, almost sacred. You understand that this daily ritual of effort and endurance was as much spiritual as physical. It was how people in these walls kept their courage from freezing solid. You turn back toward the keep, the sound of your own footsteps the only noise left. Behind you, the forge still glows faintly, a reminder that strength in winter is not just about muscle or metal. It is about persistence, the quiet fire that refuses to go out even when the world turns white. Night falls quickly, swallowing the last grey streaks of daylight behind the hills. The air in the courtyard stiffens with cold, and smoke drifts upward in slow ribbons from the chimneys. You move toward the chapel, its narrow windows flickering with candlelight. Inside, the world feels hushed and close, a soft refuge from the wind. The scent of incense greets you first warm, resinous, and faintly sweet. The stone walls absorb every sound, muting the outside world. Here, even footsteps feel sacred. A few figures kneel on wooden benches, their cloaks pulled tight around their shoulders. Breath clouds rise in front of bowed heads like offerings. The priest stands near the altar, his hands clasped, his voice low as he chants the evening prayers. The words ripple softly through the air, blending with the crackle of wax. From the surviving records of medieval estates, we know that life in a castle followed the rhythm of the church bell. Faith was not simply a matter of belief, but the architecture of time itself. Dawn began with matins, dusk ended with compline, and between those hours every act, cooking, training, mending, fit into a framework of devotion. In winter, when daylight was scarce, prayer became both clock and comfort. A curious practice emerges in the gloom. At the back of the chapel, servants light small votive candles, one for each family member away from the castle. The wax burns unevenly, sometimes sputtering, sometimes steady. People would watch these flames the way we watch the weather, believing that how a candle burned foretold the welfare of its subject. You see one flicker brightly, and an older woman smile in quiet relief. The chill seeps up through the flagstones, numbing your feet. The priest's voice deepens, carrying words in Latin that few of his listeners truly understand. But meaning here is not in comprehension. It lies in sound, repetition, and light. The glow of the candles transforms every surface into gold, even the simplest wooden cross. The cold is still there, but it feels held at bay, tamed by faith and routine. Some historians have wondered whether belief intensified during harsh winters because there was nothing else to cling to. Others think the opposite. That ritual softened fear into habit, giving people something steady to repeat while the world froze outside. Whatever the truth, religion in these months was as essential as firewood. It gave shape to endurance. You notice the chapel's ceiling, dark with smoke. The paint has faded, but faint angels hover in the arches, their faces soft and almost human. Wax drips from iron sconces like frozen rain. The altar cloth, embroidered with stars, catches what little light there is. Someone coughs in the back, a quick, apologetic sound. The congregation does not stir. A bell rings, small and pure. The priest raises a chalice, and the candles seem to lean toward it. You feel a strange warmth then, not from heat, but from stillness. The moment feels suspended, as though time has stopped to listen. For people who lived surrounded by stone and frost, this must have been what hope sounded like. Oddly enough, certain castles had chapels built directly above the kitchen, so that the rising warmth from the fires below would heat the sacred space. The combination of prayer and stew created an unexpected mingling of aromas, incense and meat broth sharing the same air. It is said that some priests complained, while others considered it a divine mercy. The prayers end. People cross themselves, rise slowly, and file out through the narrow doorway. You follow, feeling the sudden rush of cold hit your face like a memory. Outside, snow has begun again, soft and steady. The courtyard glows faintly in the starlight, footsteps already fading under the powder. A small group lingers near the chapel door. They talk quietly about the sermon, about tomorrow's chores, about how the candles burned tonight. One woman swears she saw a halo of light around her husband's flame. The others smile but do not argue. In winter, belief is as fragile and necessary as breath. You make your way along the wall toward the inner keep. Somewhere above, a bell tolls once for the evening meal. The sound rolls over the courtyard like a wave, deep and slow. Every creature in the castle seems to pause for a heartbeat. The horses, the dogs, even the wind. Then life resumes, footsteps hurrying toward warmth and food. Inside the hall, the hearth roars again. The smell of smoke clings to everything. Hair, wool, skin. A minstrel tunes his lute near the dais, his fingers blue but quick. His melody drifts upward, echoing faintly through the rafters. The tune carries a touch of the chapel's calm, though it softens into something homely, something human. In the corner, a servant lights more candles, replacing the ones that guttered during prayer. Each new flame seems to steal a fraction of darkness from the room. You notice how people instinctively move closer together, their conversations quiet but warm. It is not just the fire that keeps them alive, but proximity itself. Faith, food, Laughter and light, they weave together like threads in a single fabric. Without one, the others would unravel. Tonight, that fabric holds strong. The air hums gently with contentment, and even the oldest servant smiles as she ladles out soup. You sit for a while, hands cupped around a bowl that steams in the candlelight. Beyond the thick walls, winter rages on, indifferent and endless. Yet here, inside this flickering fortress of belief and breath, people have found a way to make warmth out of words and ritual. You sip slowly, tasting both salt and comfort. For now, the cold can wait at the door. The next morning arrives slow and grey, the kind of day that never fully brightens. You hear laughter before you even reach the great hall. It is light, scattered, rising and falling like the chirping of sparrows. When you step inside, you find the source. The children of the castle, bundled in wool, their cheeks pink with cold and joy. A small fire burns at the far end of the room, tended by a watchful nurse. Around her, half a dozen children chase each other between benches and tapestries, their giggles echoing through the rafters. You notice the eldest, a boy of perhaps 12, dressed in a short tunic with a wooden sword at his belt. His stride is purposeful, his eyes sharp. This must be the Lord's heir, already rehearsing the authority that will one day be his. From letters and chronicles, we know that children in medieval castles grew up in a curious balance of privilege and discipline. The noble sons trained early to be knights or administrators, the daughters to be wives or stewards of households. Yet winter softened these roles. For a few months, the cold slowed duty into play. Lessons continued, but so did laughter. The tutor sits near the hearth, his ink frozen inside a horn pot. He sighs, rubbing his hands together before unrolling a parchment. The children groan as he calls them closer. Their breath fogs in the air as they recite Latin verses, stumbling over consonants that feel too big for their tongues. The youngest forgets his line, then giggles until everyone joins in. Even the tutor smiles. A curious practice recorded in several households involved teaching through song during the darkest months. The melody kept children's attention and distracted them from the cold. You can imagine the hall filled with voices chanting lessons about virtue and saints while snow drifts past the narrow windows. The music must have sounded like sunlight trying to break through. When the lesson ends, the nurse ushers the children toward the courtyard. "A little air," she says, wrapping scarves around their faces. You follow as they tumble into the white world outside, their boots crunching through the frost. The older boys grab wooden shields and mock each other with theatrical battle cries. The younger ones chase after a leather ball, shouting gleefully when it lands in a snowdrift. Scholars who study medieval childhood still debate how much freedom noble children really had. Some accounts paint a strict world of obedience and ceremony. Others reveal moments of genuine affection and indulgence. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between. Watching these children now, you sense both. The hierarchy of bows and titles woven through a web of laughter and play. The girls, wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, build small figures out of snow near the stables. One shapes hers into the form of a bird, another into a tiny castle complete with towers made of twigs. A maid praises their work and hands out warm cider in wooden cups. The steam curls upward, caught briefly in the pale sunlight before it vanishes. A boy named Thomas challenges another to climb the outer stair to the battlements. The nurse scolds, but her voice is lost in the wind. They clamber up anyway, their laughter echoing down the walls. From above, they wave to you, proud conquerors of their frozen kingdom. For a moment, they look utterly free, untouched by the weight of title or expectation. Inside again, their gloves drip from melting snow. The tutor frowns at the puddles forming on the rushes, but no one pays him much mind. The younger ones settle near the fire with wooden toys, horses, knights, and tiny castles carved by the carpenter during long evenings. These playthings are rough but beloved, their edges smoothed by generations of small hands. Oddly enough, in some noble households, pets were assigned to children as lessons in care and responsibility. A pup curls near the youngest girl now, his tail wagging lazily. She feeds him a crumb from her sleeve and whispers something only he can hear. The two seem content in their private world. A servant enters with a tray of oatcakes. The smell of honey and butter fills the hall, pulling every gaze toward it. The children swarm around, their manners forgotten for a heartbeat. The nurse laughs, pretending to scold, then hands out the treats one by one. Warm food is joy in this season, even for those born to plenty. By midday, lessons resume in a smaller chamber. The tutor unrolls a map, its edges cracked with age. He points to faraway lands, France, the Holy Roman Empire, places the children know only through stories. They listen with wide eyes as he speaks of snow-covered passes and strange tongues. You notice how they lean closer, drawn to the idea that the world might be bigger than the walls around them. Experts agree that winter education often doubled as storytelling. With little light and fewer distractions, knowledge was passed through tales. Geography became adventure, morality became parable, and history turned into legend. The line between learning and dreaming blurred until both were the same. Later, as the light fades, the nurse gathers the children once more. She tells them a story of St. Nicholas rescuing sailors from a storm. Her voice is low and soothing, each word measured like a lullaby. The children lean against each other, their eyes half closed, their faces golden in the firelight. One by one, they drift towards sleep. The eldest boy resists, insisting he is too old for stories. Yet when the nurse finishes, even he smiles faintly before following the others to bed. The tutor watches them go, then sits by the dying fire. His breath forms a soft cloud in the air. You linger for a moment in the quiet that follows, listening to the faint crackle of embers and the distant sigh of wind through the towers. Childhood in a medieval castle was not simple, but it was real, built from duty, imagination, and the small mercies of warmth and play. You feel an unexpected tenderness for these children who laughed through frost and learned by candlelight, growing in a world both harsh and strangely kind. The air in the castle shifts again as winter deepens. Fires burn longer, meals grow heavier, and the smell of smoke clings to every thread of clothing. Somewhere behind the kitchen, in a small chamber lined with shelves of jars and bundles of dried herbs, another rhythm unfolds, the quiet work of the castle's healer. You step inside and feel the temperature drop slightly. The air smells of mint, vinegar, and something earthy that you cannot name. A woman stands at the table, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her fingers stained green. She crushes dried leaves in a wooden mortar, humming under her breath. Her voice is low and steady, a tune that seems to keep time with the pestle's rhythm. The light from the narrow window paints the dust motes gold as they drift across the room. On a shelf beside her rests a small iron brazier, where a thin thread of smoke curls from burning rosemary. We know from surviving manuscripts such as the Leech Book of Bald that medieval healers combined what we would now call medicine, herbalism, and prayer. They believed illness came from imbalance of humours, of seasons, of spirit. Winter, with its cold and stillness, was thought to invite melancholy and phlegm. Everything they mixed sought to warm and rouse the body back to life. The healer looks up, smiles faintly, and gestures for you to come closer. She opens a jar filled with dark honey and crumbled herbs. "For sore throats," she says softly, stirring the mixture with a spoon carved from bone. The honey gleams thick and amber in the light. "If the cough is stubborn, I add garlic. Saints forgive the smell." You laugh quietly, and she nods as if to say that laughter itself is medicine too. A curious detail recorded by travelers mentions that in winter, castles often smelled like a blend of kitchens and apothecaries. The same herbs that flavoured food also filled poultices, teas, and salves. Sage for both digestion and infection, thyme for courage and coughs, marjoram for grief. The healer's shelves are a library of such dual-purpose miracles, each labelled in faded ink. A boy enters, sniffling and red-eyed. He carries a message from the stable. One of the grooms has fallen ill. The healer gathers a basket, placing inside small packets of dried elderflower, a flask of vinegar, and a charm wrapped in linen. You notice her fingers trace a small sign over the charm before she tucks it in. Her voice lowers to a whisper. For comfort, she explains. Sometimes the heart needs more tending than the body. Historians still discuss how much of this work was practical and how much was faith. Some argue that early medicine relied more on belief than evidence. Others insist that these healers, often women, preserved knowledge that modern science later rediscovered. Whatever the truth, their craft was half observation, half intuition, and entirely necessary. You follow her to the stables, where the sick groom lies on a pile of blankets. His face is flushed, his breath shallow. The healer kneels beside him, mixes vinegar with crushed herbs, and presses the cloth gently to his forehead. The smell is sharp but soothing. She murmurs words too quiet to catch part prayer, part comfort. The groom opens his eyes briefly, manages a faint smile, and closes them again. Back in her chamber, the healer pours a dark liquid from a flask into a cup. It smells of wine and cloves. She explains that it is Hippocras, spiced wine believed to warm the blood and strengthen the heart. It is both tonic and indulgence. She offers you a sip, and the warmth spreads through you immediately. The taste is rich, sweet, and slightly bitter. Oddly enough, there was a belief that winter illnesses came from the stars. Certain constellations were thought to influence the body's humours. The healer keeps a small chart rolled up by her window, where she marks the moon's phases. It helps me know when to cut, when to rest, she says, glancing toward it. Whether the stars truly guided her or simply gave her courage, no one can say. On another table, small bowls hold powders of ground chalk and crushed petals. She uses them to make salves for frostbite. She explains that snow burns the skin as much as fire does, and so she treats it with oil and patience. Nearby, a bundle of dried ivy hangs upside down. For rheumatism, she adds, hung near the bed to draw the pain away. Experts in medieval healthcare note how physical and spiritual remedies blurred together. Healing was as much about restoring balance to the soul as to the body. A confession, a prayer, or a candle could accompany a dose of medicine. The healer herself confides quietly that she sometimes pretends confidence even when uncertain. People heal faster, she says, when they believe they can. Outside, the snow thickens again, coating the world in silence. The healer steps to the doorway and looks out. Cold keeps everything honest, she says softly. You cannot lie to the body in winter. It tells you what it needs. She closes the door gently, returns to her table, and begins to grind another set of herbs. A small cat leaps onto the bench, its paws silent. It watches her work, tail curling like a question mark. She scratches its head absently. The animal purrs, and the room feels warmer for it. The healer glances at you, her eyes crinkling with amusement. Even the cat earns its keep, she says. Mice fear her more than they fear the cold. The brazier's flame flickers, and shadows dance across the jars. You realize this small chamber, hidden away from the grand halls, is another kind of sanctuary. Here, the world narrows to touch, scent, and faith. You smell rosemary and honey. You hear the steady scrape of pestle on stone, and you understand that this too was survival, the gentle art of easing pain when everything outside turns to ice. The next morning, the castle is wrapped in silence. Snow lies deep against the walls, soft as wool, muting every sound except the faint creak of wood and the low moan of wind through the arrow slits. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the echo of boots through the courtyard. Today, movement means communication, and communication means life. The messenger's horse waits by the gate, its breath steaming into the cold air. The animal stamps impatiently while a groom tightens its girth strap. Nearby, a man in a thick cloak checks a leather satchel hanging from his shoulder. Inside are several folded letters sealed with wax, each marked by the Lord's crest. His gloved fingers touch them with the care of someone handling treasure. Records from royal and noble households reveal that winter messengers were a class apart. They needed to ride through conditions that made most travelers turn back. Roads were buried, bridges treacherous, rivers frozen or flooding depending on the week. Yet the life of a castle depended on their journeys. Grain shipments, taxes, alliances, and warnings all rode inside those letters. The porter opens the small postern gate, and a gust of snow rushes in. The messenger pulls his hood low and mounts quickly. His cloak snaps behind him like a flag. Before he disappears into the white distance, the steward presses a small flask into his hand. "For warmth," he says. The man nods once and spurs his horse forward, vanishing almost at once. The hoofbeats fade, swallowed by snow. A curious detail preserved in medieval correspondence mentions that letters were sometimes wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside hollowed reeds or horn tubes to keep them dry. You picture the messenger riding with such precious cargo against his chest, trusting in layers of wool and stubbornness to protect it. The wind would tear at his hood, the snow sting his eyes, but the message would go on. Inside the castle, the scribes continue their own work. You find them in a narrow chamber off the hall, seated at a long table littered with quills and half-used candles. Their fingers are smudged with ink, their breath visible in the cold air. One scratches words across parchment with slow precision, pausing often to warm his hands over a brazier. The faint scraping of pen on skin feels like the heartbeat of the building. We know from surviving missives that communication between castles and courts followed strict forms of politeness, even in emergencies. The language was careful, formal, and steeped in ritual. Every letter began with blessings and ended with prayers for health and safe return. Between those courtesies, matters of trade, war, and marriage were negotiated in sentences as sharp as swords. A young clerk dips his pen again and leans close to the parchment. He writes by dictation, repeating each phrase softly as he goes. The lord paces behind him, dictating a message to a neighbouring baron. His tone is measured, his eyes thoughtful. The words are not simply ink, they are the castle's breath reaching beyond its walls. Oddly enough, pigeons were sometimes kept as secondary messengers during long sieges or deep winters. They roosted in the upper towers, fed carefully on barley and peas. A small boy now climbs the steps with a pouch of grain. He whispers to the birds as he scatters it, their wings fluttering softly. In a world frozen solid, the faint rush of feathers feels like a promise that movement still exists. Down in the gatehouse, another kind of communication happens. Two guards exchange news from the village, whose crops survived the frost, who has fallen ill, who found a wolf track near the woods. Information travels here not by parchment but by voice, passed like embers from one mouth to another. A cough, a sigh, a whispered story of strange lights in the forest, all pieces of the winter's gossip. Experts studying medieval logistics remain divided about how far messages could reliably travel during the coldest months. Some evidence suggests that a good courier could cover 30 miles a day, even in snow. Others claim that entire regions became isolated until spring. The truth may be that success depended less on roads than on resolve. The messenger from earlier will stop at way stations along the route, small manors or monasteries where a warm meal and a fire await. In return, he carries letters for others, becoming part of a web that keeps the realm breathing. One monk wrote that such riders were the veins through which the kingdom's lifeblood runs. You imagine him nodding in satisfaction, quill in hand, as the fire smoked beside him. Back in the scribe's chamber, the last letter of the day is sealed with red wax. The steward presses the signet ring into it and holds it up to the candlelight. The wax shines briefly, then hardens. The smell of it, faintly sweet, faintly burnt, lingers in the air. This small ritual repeats day after day, the written voice of the castle carrying across mountains and rivers. A boy collects the finished letters, wraps them in linen, and sets them in a wooden box. He locks it, pockets the key, and hurries away to deliver it to the stable master. The rhythm of these actions feels ceremonial, each step performed with solemn efficiency. In a world that can turn silent overnight under snow, communication becomes an act of defiance, proof that people still reach toward each other. You step outside again. The wind cuts your face, but the sky has cleared a little. Far in the distance, you imagine the messenger still riding, his cloak white with frost. The land stretches endless before him, a sheet of frozen silver under the pale Sunday. Somewhere beyond that horizon waits another castle, another fire, another pair of hands to break the wax seal and read his lord's words aloud. As you turn back toward the keep, a bell rings faintly from the chapel tower. The sound carries across the snow like a thread, binding this isolated world together. You realize that even in the coldest winters, voices found ways to travel by horse, by bird, by parchment, by prayer. Words, like warmth, refuse to be still. The sky hangs low and pale, heavy with another promise of snow. The air tastes like iron and quiet. Down in the armory, the men-at-arms oil their weapons and mutter about the weather. The forge still glows, the hammer still rings, but war feels far away. Even so, no one truly relaxes. In every castle, winter brings a strange question. Does the cold end fighting or merely pause it? You walk among the racks of spears and shields, feeling the faint heat from the forge on your face. A young soldier sharpens a blade with slow care, his breath a steady rhythm. The grindstone sings as steel kisses stone. Sparks leap and vanish. He smiles at you, tired but alert. "We keep ready," he says. "Snow or no snow, someone always finds a reason to fight." Chronicles from across Europe paint a mixed picture of winter warfare. Some armies packed up entirely once frost settled, fearing hunger more than the enemy. Others took advantage of frozen rivers to cross terrain that would be impassable in summer. Battles became rarer, but raids did not. Hunger and ambition both ignored the season. A curious note appears in the writings of a monk from Burgundy. He described a siege where attackers used frozen animal hides as shields, claiming the slick surface turned aside arrows. It may have been an exaggeration, but it shows the ingenuity born of desperation. You can imagine men crouched behind glistening hides, their breath freezing in their beards as they crept toward the walls. In the great hall, the Lord sits with his advisors, tracing lines on a rough map. His fingers move over inked rivers and mountain ridges. The steward points out supply routes. The captain notes the danger of avalanches. Their voices are low but firm. War is never far from thought, even while the hearth burns and laughter fills the corridor outside. Historians still disagree about whether the cold truly stopped medieval armies. Some evidence suggests truces were common, negotiated to spare men and horses. Others argue that ambition burned hotter than frost, driving campaigns even through ice and sleet. Perhaps both are true, depending on who commanded and what pride demanded. In the courtyard, two soldiers practice with wooden staves, their boots slipping on packed snow. The blows sound heavy, hollow, and awkward. Each strike is followed by laughter and a quick curse. They are practicing not for glory, but to keep blood moving. Motion, again, is survival. Nearby, an older man polishes a set of chainmail, every ring darkened with soot. He hums softly to himself, a tune that might be a prayer or simply habit. His fingers move with the ease of years. When you ask how long he has served, he shrugs. "Since the winter my beard was black," he says. "The wars change, but the cold stays the same." A strange superstition drifts among the men. They say that the ghost of a soldier who froze during battle walks the fields near the castle on nights when the wind blows east. If you hear him, you must not look back, or you will lose your courage. No one admits to believing it, yet every guard glances over his shoulder when the wind howls. You climb the battlements where the guards stand watch. The landscape below is still and pale, dotted with faint plumes of smoke from distant cottages. The horizon disappears into haze. From here, peace looks absolute, yet everyone knows how quickly that illusion can shatter. A single torch on the ridge, a rider too far north, and the alarm bell would sound. Experts in medieval logistics remind us that castles were not just fortresses but supply hubs. During winter, stores of grain, salted meat, and arrows were counted daily. The garrison's survival depended on discipline. Every crumb mattered, every candle stub, every drop of oil. A careless steward could lose a fortress faster than an enemy's catapult. In the distance, you hear the faint crack of ice on the moat. A duck startles, flapping up into the grey air. The guard beside you grins. "That sound keeps me awake," he says. "Better than prayer sometimes." You smile back, understanding the humour born of monotony. Oddly enough, there are tales of entire sieges lasting through deep winter. Fires burned constantly, snow piled high against ladders, and both sides suffered in equal measure. Chroniclers describe icicles hanging from helmets, frozen bread too hard to eat, and the eerie silence that fell when arrows stuck fast in snow instead of striking wood. The image feels almost unreal, yet its quiet horror lingers. The captain of the guard appears beside you. He leans on the parapet, scanning the white fields. His voice carries easily in the thin air. "The world looks peaceful," he says. But peace is a lie told by distance. Someone out there is already planning spring. He turns away, leaving his words behind like smoke. As dusk deepens, the men retreat indoors. The armory glows orange from the forge, where the blacksmith shapes new arrowheads. The sound of hammer on anvil fills the air, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the snow begins again, soft flakes falling into the traces of footprints until even those are gone. You walk back toward the keep. The great doors close with a deep thud, sealing warmth inside. For now, the world beyond can wait. Yet you know that in every castle across the land, someone else is drawing maps by candlelight, whispering of borders and honor, pretending that winter will hold still forever. You pass the hall where the children laugh, the kitchen where pots simmer, the chapel where candles burn. Life continues, even under the shadow of potential war. That is the quiet miracle of these walls. No matter what waits beyond them, people find ways to stay alive, to plan, to hope. Outside, the wind changes direction. It carries the faint scent of snow mixed with smoke, like the breath of a sleeping dragon. You pause, listening to the castle's silence, and understand why medieval chroniclers so often called peace a season, not a promise. Winter might slow conflict, but it never truly ended it. The wind has eased by morning, leaving the castle blanketed in stillness. The snow in the courtyard glows faintly blue in the early light, unbroken except for a single trail of footprints leading toward the gatehouse. You follow them and find the porter unlocking the small side door to admit travelers. The hinges groan softly. Beyond the gate, 3 figures wait with frost clinging to their cloaks and beards. They bow quickly, grateful to be allowed inside. Visitors are rare in deep winter, but they arrive all the same. Some come out of necessity, others out of desperation. The first man looks like a merchant. His cart creaks behind him, half buried in snow. The second is a pilgrim carrying a wooden staff wrapped with strips of cloth. The third is a young woman leading a tired mule. Her face is hidden by her hood, her breath rising like smoke. The steward greets them in the outer hall. His tone is cautious but courteous. Hospitality is both duty and risk. Every guest means another mouth to feed, but to turn them away would stain the castle's honor. He asks their names and business while servants take their cloaks and beat the snow from their boots. Chroniclers of medieval customs tell us that the art of hosting strangers was as carefully observed as any law. Castles served not only as fortresses but as havens for travelers when roads froze and inns closed. The great hall became a crossroads of stories and survival. A guest's manners and the lord's generosity were part of the same ancient dance. The merchant presents a letter of introduction from a nearby town and bows deeply. He offers small gifts: a pouch of saffron, a roll of fine wool, a pot of honey sealed in wax. The steward accepts them with a nod and orders hot ale brought. The merchant's eyes brighten at the sight of the fire, and he holds his hands toward it as though worshipping. The pilgrim kneels briefly, murmuring a blessing. His journey has taken months, he explains. He seeks the shrine of a local saint rumored to protect travelers. His sandals are patched with scraps of cloth, and his staff trembles slightly in his hands. The steward nods and promises him a place near the kitchen fire for the night. The young woman removes her hood at last. Her hair is damp with melted snow. She introduces herself as a minstrel, saying she carries songs instead of letters. Her voice is soft but confident. The steward smiles, recognizing an old opportunity. Music for warmth. He instructs a servant to bring her to the hall after supper. A curious entry in one household ledger lists the varied guests of a single winter: monks, traders, a wounded soldier, even a traveling falconer. Some stayed a night, others an entire season. Their presence turned isolation into connection, each arrival carrying whispers of the wider world. You sense that this castle is no different. By evening, the great hall fills again with sound. The fire crackles high, and the smell of roasted meat drifts through the air. The lord and lady sit at the high table while guests and household members mingle below. The minstrel tunes her small harp, her fingers moving lightly across the strings. A hush falls as she begins to play. Her song tells of a city far to the south, where winter never reaches and the sea smells of oranges. Her voice rises slowly, clear and warm. For a few minutes, everyone forgets the cold entirely. Even the servants pause, smiling at the melody. When she finishes, the silence that follows feels like reverence. Then come the cheers and the laughter, quick and full of life. Oddly enough, some castles kept a special room called the Stranger's Chamber, reserved for unexpected visitors. It was often near the gate, both for convenience and caution. You peek into such a chamber later that night. The merchant sleeps soundly under a wool blanket. The pilgrim prays quietly by the fire, his lips moving in rhythm with the flames. The minstrel hums to herself while unbraiding her hair. The space smells of damp wool and wood smoke, yet it feels almost holy, like a pocket of shared humanity. Historians still debate whether such hospitality was truly generous or merely transactional. Some see it as religious duty rooted in the Christian command to shelter the stranger. Others view it as politics, a way for lords to maintain networks of loyalty and influence. Perhaps it was both, intertwined like the threads of the tapestries hanging in the hall. You step back into the corridor and hear faint voices through the stone. The minstrel is teaching the kitchen boys a chorus, their laughter rising in bursts. Down the hall, a guard retells a traveler's story about wolves that follow armies across frozen rivers. The sound of living words carries warmth farther than any fire could. Before sleeping, the steward walks the corridors to check on the guests. He moves quietly, stopping by each door. His lantern casts a soft pool of light that fades as he moves away. The castle rests easier knowing its visitors are safe, for kindness, even in small acts, keeps fear from creeping in. Outside, the wind stirs again. Snow begins to fall in slow spirals, catching the torchlight as it drifts. Inside, you can still hear the faint echo of the minstrel's song, soft as breath. It tells of far-off lands, of roads that do not freeze, of mornings when light feels warm against the skin. The melody fades into silence, leaving behind a sense of calm so deep that for once, the castle seems to dream along with its people. By the next dawn, the castle is quiet again, wrapped in a hush that feels almost deliberate. You follow the faint smell of hay and damp straw toward the lower courtyard, where the sounds of animals replace the murmur of human voices. The stables and kennels form a world of their own, full of warmth, motion, and the deep, earthy rhythm of breath. The stable doors open with a low creak. Inside, the air feels warmer, thick with the smell of horses, leather, and smoke from the grooms' lanterns. A grey mare stamps softly in her stall, shaking snow from her mane. Steam rises from her body in slow curls, A groom pats her neck, murmuring to her with the tenderness of an old friend. You realize that in winter, animals are both laborers and lifelines, their warmth part of the castle's beating heart. Archaeological finds and written accounts agree that stables in fortified castles were often better insulated than servants' rooms. Thick walls, low ceilings, and shared breath kept them warmer than the grand halls above. Some lords even walked through the stalls at night to check on prized horses, wrapping them in woolen blankets and feeding them dried oats soaked in ale to keep up their strength. You move deeper into the stable. The floor is covered in straw that crunches beneath your boots. In one corner, two boys shovel manure into baskets, working quickly before the cold stiffens their fingers. They laugh as they work, teasing each other about whose stall smells worse. The air is thick but alive, filled with the steady sounds of snorts, stamping hooves, and rustling straw. A curious practice mentioned in an old French record describes grooms burning bundles of dried herbs to mask the odor and purify the air. The smoke rises now from a small pot in the center of the room, carrying the scents of thyme and juniper. You cough once, then smile as the sharp fragrance cuts through the heaviness. The animals seem calmer for it too, their ears twitching lazily. In the next chamber, a farrier works beside a glowing forge. The rhythmic clang of hammer on iron fills the space. Sparks jump and fade against the damp walls. He shapes a horseshoe carefully, dipping it into a barrel of water where it hisses like an angry serpent. The smell of hot metal mixes with hay and ash, creating an aroma both harsh and comforting. His hands are rough, his arms steady. The cold bites the hooves as much as it bites the hands, he says, not looking up. Outside, the kennels lie against the inner wall of the bailey. The hounds inside bark softly when you approach, their tails thudding against the wooden pens. A huntsman kneels, scratching the ears of a massive mastiff whose fur shines like iron. These dogs are both protectors and companions, bred to guard the gate and chase down wolves that wander too close. One of them yawns wide, revealing teeth white as frost. Written chronicles describe how noble families prized their dogs almost as highly as their horses. They were fed better than most peasants, their collars sometimes decorated with silver or bells. You can hear those bells now, a faint, cheerful music beneath the huff of the animal's breath. The huntsman chuckles. They eat more meat than I do, he says, and you believe him. A small door leads from the kennels to the granary, where the castle's stores feed for both animals and humans. The air smells of dust and grain. Mice skitter along the rafters, quick and confident. The castle's cats earn their keep here. You spot one, a slender tabby, stalking with perfect patience before pouncing into the shadows. A brief squeak, then silence. The cat glances at you, as if demanding admiration before vanishing into the hay. Historians still discuss how animals shaped the daily rhythm of castle life. Some argue they were simply tools of survival, others that they formed deep emotional bonds with the people who tended them. Watching the groom whisper to his horse and the huntsman pat his dogs, it feels impossible to separate one truth from the other. In this cold world, every bit of warmth was shared. The stablemaster enters, a large man with a beard rimed in frost. He inspects each stall with quiet authority. His job is as important as the stewards above stairs. Without his care, the castle's transport, hunting, and even defense could falter. He stops to check the hay, tests the oats with a handful, and nods approvingly. Still dry, he says. That's a good omen. A faint superstition lingers among the staff. They believe that a horse sneezing twice before sunrise means fair weather to come. When one of the mares does exactly that, the boys cheer softly. The stablemaster pretends not to believe, but his smile gives him away. As you linger near the door, a thin ray of sunlight breaks through the clouds. It glances off the polished metal of the harnesses and turns the frost on the rafters into a shimmer of silver. The horses shift, restless but content. The dogs lie down again, their tails curled to their chests. The smell of hay and warm breath fills the space completely. Oddly enough, Castles sometimes housed exotic animals as gifts or symbols of prestige. Chronicles mention pet falcons in the solar, tame deer in courtyards, and once even a small bear cub kept by a northern lord who claimed it brought luck. No one in this castle keeps such creatures, but the gossip about them travels far, adding a touch of wonder to long winters. As the afternoon deepens, the farrier quenches his last piece of iron and hangs his tools neatly. The grooms finish their chores and lean against the stalls, exchanging stories about spring hunts that feel impossibly far away. The warmth of work has left their faces flushed, their eyes bright. The animals settle into steady breathing, their movements slow and peaceful. You stand quietly for a moment, listening. The sounds of the stable snorts, sighs, the faint jingle of harness rings form a rhythm older than the castle itself. Here, among creatures that neither scheme nor command, winter feels less cruel. It becomes a shared endurance, a pact between man and beast, to wait for the thaw together. When you step back into the courtyard, the cold feels sharper, cleaner. Behind you, the muffled noises of the stable continue like a heartbeat under layers of snow. The castle may guard its treasures in stone, but its truest warmth, you think, lives in the breath of its animals. Evening falls without ceremony, swallowing the last colour from the sky. Inside the castle, torches are lit one by one, their flames quivering against the stone. Smoke curls lazily toward the rafters, blending with the faint haze of cooking fires and candle soot. You can almost taste the air, thick with the memory of every fire that has ever burned within these walls. The silence that settles afterward is not empty but weighted, a kind of quiet filled with endurance. You wander through a corridor that feels longer at night, the sound of your steps echoing into darkness. The castle sleeps in fragments. A servant snores near the kitchen door. A guard clears his throat outside the gatehouse. A dog pads past with eyes reflecting candlelight. The rhythm of life slows but never fully stops. From descriptions preserved in travellers' journals, we know that winter nights in castles were some of the most difficult hours of the season. The heat from the fires faded quickly once the wood turned to embers, and draughts crept through every crack. The stone walls breathed cold back into the rooms, a slow exhale that reached even the highest chambers. People learned to live within it rather than against it. A curious habit often mentioned in such accounts involves people sleeping in pairs or groups for warmth, even among servants who might barely speak to one another by day. The night stripped away rank and formality. Bodies shared heat because survival cared nothing for titles. You imagine the long rows of pallets lined with straw, the muffled rustle of blankets, the occasional sigh or whisper as people drifted toward uneasy dreams. The air grows denser as you climb the stair to the upper floor. Up here, the walls darken from candle smoke. Soot smudges the edges of frescoes, softening their colours into muted browns and greys. It is strange how smoke seems both a mark of life and decay at once. It stains everything it touches, yet without it, warmth would vanish completely. In the great hall, only a few embers glow. The shadows stretch tall across the floor. A single servant moves silently, poking the coals and covering them with ash to keep them alive until morning. The faint hiss of settling wood sounds like breath. He pauses, glances upward at the beams where the light barely reaches, and crosses himself quickly before leaving. It is not fear that drives the gesture but habit, the small prayers of those who live close to the unknown. Some historians believe the long darkness of winter affected more than the body. It shaped mood, thought, even faith. In these months, people spoke often of spirits or omens that visited during sleepless hours. Others say these tales were simply ways of naming loneliness. Either way, the imagination filled what light could not reach. You pause by a narrow window slit, looking out into the courtyard. The world outside lies silver and utterly still. The moon glances off the snow, turning every surface into pale glass. Smoke drifts from a single chimney, wavering in the breeze. No sound breaks the stillness except the faint creak of timber. The beauty of it is stark and a little sad. like a song sung under one's breath. A maid passes behind you, carrying a candle shielded by her hand. Her shadow moves along the wall beside her, large and gentle. She nods as she passes. The smell of tallow and wax lingers in her wake, sweet but faintly acrid. You follow her steps until she disappears behind a door. Inside that chamber, several servants sit near a brazier, mending clothes and whispering stories to keep themselves awake. Their laughter is soft and careful. They talk about summer, about markets and rivers, about the taste of berries. Each memory glows for a moment, bright against the surrounding grey. Someone begins to hum a tune, the same one you heard days ago in the kitchen. It seems to travel through the air like a thread connecting every fire, every heartbeat in the castle. Oddly enough, medieval people sometimes hung polished metal discs or bowls near candles, believing the reflected light could chase away darkness that invited misfortune. You notice one now on the wall, warped and shining like a tiny sundae. It scatters the candlelight in trembling patterns across the ceiling. The illusion is fragile, but in a place ruled by cold and night, fragility can still be beautiful. The longer you stand here, the more aware you become of sound. Each whisper, each crack of burning wood feels magnified. The castle at night hums with its own music, made of breath, flicker, and patience. This is the silence of survival, where every soul waits for dawn but does not waste the waiting. Experts on medieval psychology suggest that long winters taught people a strange intimacy with stillness. Without distraction, they listened more deeply to fire, to footsteps, to each other. Some chroniclers describe this as a season of contemplation, when even the most hardened soldiers grew reflective. You can almost feel it now, that quiet understanding that endurance is an inner art as much as an outer act. When the last candle burns low, you make your way toward the small window again. The snow outside sparkles under moonlight. The roofs gleam pale, and the courtyard looks like a frozen sea. Somewhere deep below, a horse snorts softly. Somewhere higher up, a prayer bell chimes faintly, marking midnight. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The air smells of soot and faint pine from the torches. The warmth on your face comes not from flame but from awareness, from standing inside a world that refuses to surrender its light to the cold. You understand why people filled these walls with laughter, song, and stories. Without them, winter would not simply chill the body, it would silence the heart. When you open your eyes again, the embers are nearly gone. The hall feels timeless, poised between sleep and waking. You take one slow breath and imagine the hundreds of winters this castle has endured, each leaving behind a thin layer of smoke and memory. The air carries them all. Morning arrives quietly, not with brightness, but with a gradual lightening of the sky that seeps into the grey stone like a sigh. You can feel the shift before you see it. The air tastes different, faintly soft, tinged with the scent of damp rather than frost. Somewhere in the distance, a single drip of water falls from the roof, followed by another. The thaw has begun. You walk into the courtyard and hear the sound that everyone in the castle waits for all winter. Water. It trickles down the gutters. It slips along the walls. It drops from the edges of the battlements in slow, deliberate rhythms. Icicles hang like glass daggers, melting at the tips. Each drop lands with a sound as bright as a bell. The grooms are already at work, throwing open the stable doors to let in the air. Steam rises from the warm breath of horses as sunlight filters through the cracks. The dogs bark restlessly, sensing the change. A stable boy laughs and says, "Listen, the world is breathing again." His words echo lightly, filled with joy that needs no permission. From estate records and letters, we know that the first signs of thaw brought both relief and anxiety. The melting snow meant new beginnings, but it also meant mud, flooded roads, and work. The same ice that had kept food fresh now turned to slush, and the stores had to be checked before spoilage set in. Hope and labour arrived hand in hand. The kitchen bursts with movement. Servants carry baskets of onions, sprouting green shoots. dried beans softening in pots of water, and salted meat needing attention. The air smells rich and sharp. Someone opens a shutter to let in the faint light, and the warmth of the room seems to double. A cook laughs as the breeze touches her face. "Even the wind is kind today," she says. A curious old practice mentioned by chroniclers involved holding a small feast to mark the first thaw. It was not a grand event, just a shared meal to thank Providence for another survived winter. The servants baked bread from the last of the stored flour, the Lord shared wine from his private supply, and the chapel bell rang 3 times in gratitude. You can almost see it beginning to unfold here. In the great hall the hearth blazes again, but the mood has changed. The cold no longer feels eternal. Children run across the floor, laughing as their boots leave muddy prints on the rushes. No one scolds them. Even the steward, who usually guards order like a hawk, smiles at the sight. The air hums with relief. The lady of the castle stands near the window, watching the snow melt drip from the roofs. She breathes deeply, as though inhaling the scent of life itself. Her maid brings a basin of fresh water, newly drawn from the well. It is no longer frozen solid. The lady washes her hands slowly, savoring the simple luxury of water that moves. Experts in medieval environmental history often describe the thaw as a kind of annual resurrection. The sound of running water signaled not only the end of hardship, but the return of trade, letters, and connection. Roads became passable, markets reopened, and travelers carried news again. The silence of winter broke like a shell, and voices returned to the land. Outside, the moat begins to thaw unevenly. Sheets of ice slide against one another with soft cracks, like glass breaking in slow motion. A duck lands clumsily in the half-open water, sending ripples outward. The guards watch with amused smiles, one of them whistling a tune. The melody carries across the courtyard, high and clear. A boy brings out a broom to sweep away the slush near the kitchen steps. He works with cheerful energy, splashing mud on his boots. "It smells of earth again," he says, and you realize he is right. The air, though still cold, carries the first faint scent of soil, that ancient promise of growth. Oddly enough, there were rituals of cleansing performed at this time in some castles. Rushes from the floors were replaced completely, walls scrubbed with vinegar water, and beds aired for the first time in months. You catch sight of servants beating blankets in the courtyard, laughter mixing with the rhythmic thuds. The sound feels like music. In the chapel, the priest blesses a bowl of melted snow, calling it the water of return. He sprinkles it on the congregation, droplets shining on their hair. People close their eyes, not because they fear the water, but because they have missed the feeling of something liquid and alive touching their skin. The moment feels small yet sacred. As midday arrives, the Lord walks through the yard with his steward, inspecting the damage of the season. Roofs drip steadily, walls darken with moisture, and the first patches of brown earth appear at the base of the tower. He nods approvingly, noting which repairs to begin. His boots sink slightly in the mud, and he laughs. It is a rare sound, full of ease. Historians write that after the first thaw, castle life accelerated quickly. Markets were arranged, livestock moved back to outer pastures, and winter's heavy meals gave way to lighter fare. Even the mood of conversation changed. Plans that had been whispered over fires became declarations made aloud. Spring was not yet here, but hope had already arrived. By late afternoon, sunlight filters into places that have known only shadow for months. It glances off puddles that mirror the sky, catches on droplets hanging from branches, and paints gold streaks on the damp stone. Children chase reflections across the ground while a maid laughs, her voice carrying above the splash of water. As evening falls, the hall fills once more, but the fire now feels like a celebration rather than defense. The walls shimmer faintly with moisture, reflecting the light in soft halos. The air carries the mingled scent of wet wood, smoke, and bread baking somewhere nearby. Everyone moves more freely, as though the castle itself has begun to exhale. You stand near the doorway, watching the faces around the fire. They are the same people who endured the long silence, yet their eyes seem different now, lighter, filled with quiet triumph. In their laughter, you hear gratitude disguised as joy. The world outside is still cold, but the promise of change has already touched the walls. The first thaw has come, and with it, the castle remembers how to breathe. The days grow longer, though the cold lingers in the corners of the castle like an old guest reluctant to leave. The fires still burn, but less fiercely, their light turning from survival to comfort. At night, the great hall fills not only with warmth but with voices telling stories. This is the hour when the past comes alive in the shimmer of the embers, and you settle close enough to listen. A bard has returned from the road, his cloak dusty from travel, his harp polished but worn along the edges. He sits on a low stool near the hearth, tuning his strings with careful fingers. The people gather around, servants and nobles alike. No one minds the mingling of ranks tonight. Storytelling is the one art that belongs to everyone. From letters and household accounts, we know that in winter evenings, tales replaced sunlight. They warmed the imagination when the body could not be comforted by heat alone. Minstrels, pilgrims, and wandering monks carried stories from one castle to another, sewing together the scattered world of medieval Europe with words instead of roads. The bard begins softly, his voice low and rough from cold air. He tells of a knight who rode into a snowstorm seeking a lost child, and found instead a spirit of frost who offered him a choice between life and courage. The listeners lean closer. The firelight flickers over their faces, and you can see their expressions shift with the story's rhythm. A curious record from a northern monastery mentions that people believed stories themselves carried power, that speaking them aloud could drive away misfortune. Words were charms, and listeners were participants. You feel it now, the shared stillness that binds everyone together, as though their combined attention itself keeps the winter from creeping back. The bard's tale grows darker. He describes the knight's struggle against the ice wind, the horse sinking in snow, the child's cry echoing across the moor. The listeners fall silent. Then his voice softens again. The spirit releases the knight after he gives away his cloak to save the child. The fire snaps loudly at that moment, almost as if it approves. The bard ends with a quiet chord, and the room exhales as one. A servant brings the bard a cup of ale. He drinks, wipes his mouth, and begins another story, this one lighter. It tells of a monk who tried to measure the length of winter with a candle and ended up discovering patience instead. Laughter ripples through the room, the kind that loosens the heart. Historians still argue whether these tales were mostly moral lessons or simple entertainment. Some see them as remnants of older pagan traditions reshaped by Christian sensibility. Others think they were just the human need for wonder finding a voice. Either way, they turned darkness into meaning, transforming each night into a bridge between endurance and imagination. In one corner, a young woman begins to sing quietly, her melody weaving through the storyteller's pauses. The tune carries a melancholy sweetness, like melted snow running through a harp string. She sings of a saint who tamed wolves with kindness, and of lovers separated by frozen rivers. The music drifts upward toward the beams, where smoke lingers in lazy spirals. A curious medieval superstition said that stories told by firelight could summon the souls of those who had lived in the same room centuries earlier. People called it the listening hour. No one truly feared it. In fact, they welcomed the thought that ancestors leaned in close, drawn by the familiar comfort of voices and warmth. You can almost imagine those unseen guests now, standing just beyond the glow, smiling faintly as the living continue their rituals of speech and song. The castle, after all, is full of memories. Every stone has heard laughter and weeping. Every wall has held echoes longer than any person's lifetime. The bard pauses again to retune his harp. The fire crackles, throwing sparks into the air. A child sitting near the front asks if ghosts can feel the cold. The room bursts into laughter. The bard grins and replies, "Only the unfriendly ones." The mood softens. Someone brings more ale, someone else throws another log onto the fire, and the night deepens with comfort. Experts studying medieval literature note that oral storytelling preserved not just myths but community itself. Each listener became a guardian of what was heard. Tomorrow, a servant might repeat one tale to another in the kitchens, and the story would grow a little, twist a little, but survive. Memory, like fire, needed tending. Outside, the thawing moat reflects a thin crescent moon. Inside, the bard finishes one final song, slow and gentle. His voice is hoarse now, his eyes shining in the dim light. He sings of spring waiting beneath the snow, of hearts that keep their color through the longest dark. The refrain is simple, almost like a prayer. All winters end, all fires rise again. When he stops, no one speaks. The silence that follows feels sacred. Then the steward clears his throat softly and thanks him. Coins clink into the bard's cup, but he seems more pleased by the attention than the payment. He nods once, smiles at the company, and begins packing his harp. The people linger a little longer. Conversations resume in low tones, filled with laughter and warmth. You stand quietly, watching the glow of the fire reflect on their faces. The smoke swirls upward like a ribbon of memory, carrying the last words of the song with it. It is easy to see why people loved these nights. For a few precious hours, the cold outside becomes a backdrop to human sound, not its master. The stories turn fear into beauty, isolation into gathering. You close your eyes and listen to the murmur of voices, the slow breath of the dying fire, and realize that this, too, is a kind of prayer. Morning arrives pale and quiet, a grey ribbon of light stretching across the sky. The air still carries a chill, but it no longer bites. You walk through the courtyard, past melting patches of snow and puddles reflecting the castle walls. Everywhere, there are signs of change. Icicles drip steadily from the roofs. A guard leans on his spear, blinking in the unexpected brightness. Even the stones seem to glisten with a faint sense of relief. Inside the keep, fires burn lower now, watched without the urgency of survival. The great hall smells of wax and damp wool, but it also holds something softer, peace. The castle has endured another winter. Life will begin to spill outward soon, toward the fields, the forests, and the roads that lead to other lives. For now there is stillness, but it is the stillness that comes after struggle, not the kind born of fear. You walk slowly through the rooms that have become familiar. The kitchen feels larger now that the smoke has thinned. The healer's chamber smells faintly of drying herbs rather than sickness. The solar glows with light reflected from the melting snow outside, and the ladies there smile as they unroll bright fabrics stored away since autumn. The season of endurance is giving way to the season of hope. From household records and chronicles, we know that the passing of winter was more than a change of weather. It marked a kind of rebirth for those who survived it. Crops would be planted, marriages arranged, and debts forgiven. People greeted one another with words of gratitude rather than complaint. The rhythm of life restarted, just as the rivers and streams began to move again. A curious note appears in one account from a Yorkshire manor. It describes how, at the first full thaw, every member of the household, lords, servants, and even animals was sprinkled with water from the well. It was meant to wash away the sleep of winter. You imagine the laughter that must have filled the courtyard that day, the shock of cold drops against warm skin, the sound of joy echoing between the towers. As you pass through the chapel, the priest is preparing for morning prayers. He lights candles along the altar and opens the shutters a little to let the light in. The scent of melted wax and damp stone mingles with the fresh air. He hums quietly to himself, a tune that seems neither solemn nor festive, but simply content. You realize that faith, like the fire, has survived another season. Historians often write that the endurance of medieval people was rooted in rhythm rather than resistance. They accepted the turning of the year as part of a larger story, one they did not control but belonged to. The cold would come again as it always did, yet they would face it with the same blend of patience and habit that had kept them alive before. In that sense, The castle itself feels like a mirror of the human spirit. Strong, imperfect, always waiting for the next beginning. You pause by the gate, where the porter oils the hinges to keep them from rusting. His hands are rough and sure. He looks up and says, "It will be spring soon," as though the thought alone could make it happen. You nod, knowing he is right. Beyond the walls, the world will wake slowly, one green shoot at a time. The castle's animals sense it too. The horses whinny softly, eager for open ground. The hounds bark at shadows that are no longer menacing. The cats stretch lazily in the sunlight spilling through the open door. Life, always practical, wastes no time in returning. Oddly enough, one old superstition claimed that castles could remember their winters. People said that when the first thunder of spring rolled across the hills, you could hear the walls creak as if exhaling. Standing here now, you almost believe it. The wind that slips through the courtyard carries the faint scent of thawed earth, and somewhere a bird sings for the first time in months. The sound feels fragile but defiant. As evening settles again, the people gather in the hall for one last night beside the winter fire. The flames crackle softly, reflecting in every cup and eye. The talk is easy now, plans for planting, for repairs, for weddings. Someone mentions a fair in a nearby town, and laughter fills the air. You sit among them, listening, and feel the warmth that has nothing to do with wood or flame. It strikes you then that the castle's endurance is not a story of walls, but of hearts. The people who live here have learned how to turn hardship into routine, routine into comfort, and comfort into gratitude. They have faced the longest nights and found ways to fill them with song and laughter. They have built their strength not in defiance of winter, but in partnership with it. Outside, the stars appear one by one, reflected faintly in the wet stones of the courtyard. The last of the snow gleams under their light. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the hush of wind around the towers. The cold is fading, but its memory lingers gently, a reminder of everything that was endured and everything that will return. The castle stands still, timeless, breathing softly with its people. Its walls hold both the echoes of struggle and the promise of renewal. In the quiet between seasons, you understand what survival truly means here. It is not victory over nature, but harmony with it. A long conversation between fire and frost, faith and patience, silence and song. And as you step away from the hall, the wind follows you through the gate, mild now, touched with warmth. The stars brighten, the snow drips, and somewhere within the stone, you almost feel the castle itself beginning to smile. You rest by the last embers of the fire, the hall dim and calm around you. The voices have faded, the laughter gone quiet, leaving only the soft hiss of wood settling into ash. The air feels tender now, like a lullaby you do not have to hear to understand. Outside, the night holds the castle gently, its silence no longer heavy but protective. You imagine the people asleep in their chambers, wrapped in furs that still smell faintly of smoke and herbs. The hounds sigh in their sleep, the horses shift in their stalls, the children dream of green fields. The cold still lingers, yet it feels harmless now, softened by the knowledge that morning will come. The stones around you hold centuries of warmth. You can feel it under your fingertips, faint but alive, like the pulse of a great, slow heart. Everything that has been endured has become part of the castle's memory. The laughter, the prayers, the silence, the patience. It is all stored here, folded into the quiet. Outside, the stars shimmer over melting snow, and a faint breeze slips through the open door. It carries the smell of damp earth, of change waiting just beyond the horizon. You close your eyes and breathe deeply. The air feels new again. When you open them, the fire has almost gone out, leaving only a soft glow. The light flickers across the stone walls, tracing the same patterns it has for hundreds of years. You smile, because you know that somewhere deep in the castle, another fire is already being lit. Rest now. The world is turning gently, and you are safe within its rhythm. Sleep well, and dream of warmth returning.